Hi, it's Nancy with Garden Scroll, and we're getting well into our new year of 2020. Today is January the 8th, and we do have our tree down, so that's a good thing, I guess. But also I wanted to tell you that it's been a little bit harder, actually. You would think it would be easier to go back and find pictures and start over again for the pictures through the winter time when you can't actually go out into the garden. I started to go out there today and just let you see that there's a garden in its dormancy stage behind me, but it was too cold and the wind was blowing, and you know what it sounds like when the wind's blowing, is it's just whipping through there and you hear it more than you hear me. But so anyway, we're inside, and I'm going to try to go back to some of the scenes, and the ones that I have right now picked out are spring scenes in the garden, because that's how the garden starts out. This picture is from early last winter, and we have not yet had a snow, not even in the forecast really, but it'll probably be here sometime in the end of this month or February, maybe even March. But even as I'm hoping for a much longer winter's nap from it all from last year, I'm going to look forward and get a glimpse of what's going to be coming in the garden this spring, because you can always go by history and at least for a guide as to what the future is going to bring. And this is the robin, of course. It's one sign that people look for the beginning of spring. And the first bloom to bloom in my garden and in many people's gardens is the Lenten rose, or hellebores, and I just love this little plant. Following the early blooming Lenten rose, the daffodils will begin to bloom, and some of the tulips will follow suit, and there will be a wash with hyacinths and miniature hyacinths and all the beautiful spring bulbs. And also right about that time or shortly thereafter, the forsythias will begin their beautiful yellow blooms. The yellow forsythias are one of my favorite heralders of spring, followed right along with this flowering quincy and this pretty pink flowering almond. And of course the snowball bush will have to show us that even without snow, it can make a snowball. And this was the first season, this last season, the first time that my black elderberry or Sambucus bloomed, and I'm looking forward to seeing it in the garden again. Right about the same time, the fruit trees begin to bloom. This is a cherry tree, and this one that you're seeing now is a redbud tree. This one is a pear tree, and the peach trees will be blooming about this time also. Also in the garden early in the spring is this lovely perennial alyssum. I think it's called compacta. Last year was the first time I had it in the garden blooming, and it did wonderful, and it's a perennial, so I'm anxious to see it coming back this season. Also, there will be a few later blooming bulbs. This one is, of course, the giant allium, which is totally a standout. And then these stand out to me too. This is a McKenna giant columbine, and I want more of these in my garden. I just love them, as do the hummingbirds. And these are the shorter columbines, still very lovely, and you can't miss them in the springtime. And even before all the other pretty spring bulbs and flowers are finished blooming, the parade of iris blooms will begin. I have some lovely iris. That first one was called Bewilderbeast, and this one, I'm not sure the name of it. It always reminds me of a hot fudge sundae. And this I love because that little spot of white just sets it off and makes it where you cannot miss it in the garden. And then this next one is a dark, dark, almost black iris, which I love. Um, and then we go right directly into this little iris, which reminds me of an angel. Every time I see it in bloom in the spring, it's just like the angels came to visit the garden. And this is another pretty little blue, soft blue colored iris. Has a little bit of the white, not quite as much, but it's noticeable too in the garden. And then this one, of course, is a standout too with the lovely contrasting colors. And then these are the Dutch iris, which bloom a little later, and they are smaller, but they're every bit as bright and beautiful as the standard irises are. And in with all the other spring things, this is definitely a spring blooming plant too. This is a candy tuft, and I would love to have this in white, just totally covering all of the border, all along the borders, just in mass. I think that would be so beautiful. Also, sometime in early spring, the lilacs will be blooming. They're gorgeous, and their scent is even more attracting and beautiful. When the lilacs begin to wane, the beautiful bridal spirea will begin to put on its show. What a lovely show it is. This is the beautiful golden chain tree, and I don't know why everybody doesn't have at least one of these. It's so beautiful, like yellow wisteria hanging off of a tree. It doesn't bloom for a long time, but it's a pretty little tree even when it's not in bloom. It does have some insect problems. It has some webworms, have to spray it for that, and for some little caterpillar that gets on it, tries to kind of destroy it. And it also, it may become a problem by throwing seeds and coming up everywhere. So far it hasn't for me, although it has put a few seeds down. And then sometime in the spring, the dianthus will begin to bloom. They seem to bloom early and then just keep right on going until it gets hot. And not only that, but they'll be back again, most usually, when it gets cooler in the fall. And then following the regular dianthus, which are a little shorter, the Sweet William dianthus will begin to bloom, and it's like it's up on a taller stalk, and then it mounds up into a ball at the top of it and makes a lovely little plant that lasts a good long time. And also in the early spring, and they bloom sporadically all through the season, and especially again later in the fall when it gets a little cooler, are the trillium or Trinity plant, also sometimes called widow's tears. I did learn, as you know, this last season that I needed to put those in a pot or something to contain their growth because they can and will take over. Once spring begins and the flowers begin to bloom, the show never ends. Neither does the watering and upkeep of the garden. But aren't these beautiful? The beautiful clematis when they come into bloom, and you put that height in the garden, giving it a whole new dimension. Brings your eye right up, or it comes right up to your eye, where you can just really enjoy it close to you, and see these beautiful clematis blooms. They bloom about the time the roses do, and some people actually plant them to grow in amongst the roses, which sounds beautiful to me. I would love that, I'm sure. Also blooming right along with the roses will be that beautiful catmint there in the background, that pretty blue. I love a soft blue in the garden. It's just so unique. There's not a whole lot of blue in the garden, but there's enough that you can find some to make it gorgeous, and you can tell that the butterflies love it also. And in this picture, you can tell that the iris are still blooming when the roses are blooming, these beautiful coral roses that I love in the background here in this picture. And then also the red is a lovely hardy amaryllis bloom. And then this is the pretty white Baptisia false indigo. I love it too. It's a pretty little bush all by itself. And then that bud that, or bloom that looks like a bud. I love it so. And this is the knockout rose that just blooms so prolifically, so beautifully in the garden when it's in its bloom. Also, about the time that the roses are blooming, the lovely larkspur, another tall plant that takes your eye upward and just makes it beautiful. But I love this blue too. It's just another eye-catching beauty in the garden. And I love the poppies. I'm having a hard time getting those started, but I had a hard time getting hollyhocks started, and I hear that once they put their seeds down, they just proliferate themselves. Isn't that beautiful? And the garden show is certainly not done, because then the beautiful peonies begin to bloom. They're huge. I don't know why, but I just love a huge flower. And these certainly take center stage of everything when they're blooming. Just one bloom is gorgeous, and then when you have a whole little bush plant filled out with these, it's just such a beauty in the garden. And these are the pretty hardy geraniums that start in usually a little bit later, but still in the spring, and can last all through the season. And I wanted to go back to the catmint because I wanted to say that it also does make a wonderful plant for a pot. You can lift it up a little higher and just enjoy it right up close to you. And all or part of this time, what is the gardener doing? Well, he or she is first of all cleaning out the old garden debris, which in my opinion is the hardest, toughest, most horriblest job there is in the garden. And then the next thing they do is plant all these tiny little plants. It's wonderful to just look at color and texture and imagine how they'll grow together, but you never know if they're going to actually take off and go, or if they're just going to kind of sit there and fizzle out. So, but it's wonderful to plant them, because in your mind's eye and in your vision, you are dreaming that they are all going to grow and flourish and become beautiful. And honestly, even if they don't, like these pretty little calabachoas, I still haven't figured out how to get those to keep going. But even if they don't, you can refill it with a little start of another plant or a brand new plant, and just go again in that pot, and it will become beautiful. Just keep it going and it will be wonderful. Here's another little one that didn't make it for me, and I love that. Isn't that gorgeous? This one also, the petunia did not last very long for me, but isn't that beautiful? And to me, it matched this little, this is actually a Concoleus, and it looked so good with it. These petunias in this pot were seeds from last year's garden, and they did wonderful all season long. Spring is a wonderful time because it's the season of new beginnings. And even if we don't know how they're going to turn out, it's so much fun just imagining and dreaming how they could turn out. These little begonias usually start out small, and by fall they're taking a starring role. This, of course, is another of the two plants that don't keep going for me, but oh, can you imagine if they did? And these white impatiens, they started out small, but they just really flourish and get so pretty by the end of the season. Another thing the gardener is doing is bringing out house plants that overwintered and bringing them out for their stay in the summer. This is how my beautiful Polymer Prince looked when I brought it out, and you can look back and see just how gorgeous it looked the day I took it back in. I have fallen for begonias, and this was a new one for me called Martha Stewart. Right now, I don't know if it's alive. There is a little nubbin left, but there's no color left on this one. For me, Coleus and Impatiens do really well. I'm so glad they do. I just don't have a problem with them unless snails or slugs get after them. But this is some of my very favorite colors together. The strawberry drop, or not strawberry drop, but the watermelon Coleus, and the beautiful lipstick pink Impatiens. I also love the fact that it brings in the butterflies and all the beautiful things like hummingbirds and just the wonderful wildlife that come to the garden. This is Bacopa, and this happens to be the blue Bacopa, which is another thing I sometimes can do well with, and sometimes it just fizzles out for me, but I love it. I love a container, especially one up on a pole where it just takes center stage. And this one is wonderful because I love it when you can put it all the way down the wire basket where it's coming out from the bottom to the top, and when it really fills up, it's just wonderful. It doesn't always fill out like I want it to in that little shallow pot, but I'm going to keep trying on this because it's so pretty. Also in the spring, little seeds are sprouting. These are rose moss seeds from last year's rose moss. If you can wait, your rose moss will reseed, and if you can't, just put a new one in there from your favorite nursery. When your other irises are waning down or gone, the Japanese water garden irises are just beginning to look great. Also, a little later in the spring, the red hot poker or kapotha, I can't say that right, but are blooming, and they're just a wonderful little plant to have their stems up tall where you can see them and they can draw attention and just like an exclamation point in the garden. By this time in the garden, the blossoms have turned to fruit and things are changing in the garden. I always like to say June, when summer begins, is the season of the daylilies, or just the lilies all together. Every day a new lily will be blooming, or a cluster of lilies, from the Asiatic to the tall tree lilies. It'll keep you going strong in the garden, keep everything beautiful and bright, and keep you going out there to see what is blooming that day, because some of them only last a day. This little plant I want to point out, this one is actually laying down, but it's called a blue anchusa, and it is in the forget-me-not family. The little blue blooms look like forget-me-nots. I want to get more coneflowers in my garden too. This one is called Cheyenne Spirit, and it goes to so many colors. This one I love because it just reminds me of a rainbow, but they can be completely yellow, completely red, completely orange. You just never know what they're going to be, so it's a wonderful surprise because they're all beautiful. And this common Buckeye butterfly is on a yellow coreopsis. Yellow is another beautiful color to blend all the other colors together in the garden. So I just finished going through from early spring till summer, and I will try to pick up from there and tell you more about what the garden looked like, and we're using it as the history of what the garden can look like this next season. I'm also looking through the catalogs and flower magazines and the different things that help me to get a vision for next year's garden and what new things I might want to put in the garden. Now is also a good time to check your local nurseries for houseplants that are being put on sale. I purchased a couple of new ones at our local Walmart. My husband and I went down to Walmart today, and I was going to look for a purple martin house. I told you that's one of our plans, is to replace that. So we're looking. So far we haven't found one, except one we didn't want to pay that price for if we don't have to. So, but I found, whoever was bringing them in said, we're bringing in spring, whether you're ready for it or not. And so I'm not. I hate to say I'm not, because as much as I love plants and love gardening, I'm not ready. I want to rest some more, but I wanted to show you Clifton. I'm showing my nephew Clifton. I'm trying it again. He knows how many of these I've killed, or actually I've lost count myself, but I know I've killed at least 2. I'm pretty sure I killed more than that. So I'm one of those people who can't even grow an ivy or a aloe vera plant inside, but I'm trying again. And also I purchased this little plant, and it is called a Goldcrest Frost Aurelia. I don't know if that's how that's pronounced, but isn't that pretty? So I'm going to try that too, which is another house plant. So I've got to get good at this so these little plants can live. So I was never a good student of history. I don't do numbers. There's too many numbers in history. But our history can definitely help shape our future. So that's what I'm looking back at these pictures for. And I hope you enjoy it. And it can also help us to determine what to do different and to change our future as we're going to change this garden. So please, if you would like to continue to enjoy the Garden Scrolls, please like and subscribe.